My name is Maya Whitaker, and I was 23 years old when a state investigator told me that my entire adult life had been built on crimes I did not commit. But before the subpoenas, before the flashing police lights outside my sister's waterfront mansion, before my brother-in-law's political fundraiser turned into a public raid, I was just the girl in the black server's shirt holding a silver tray, pretending not to exist. On a freezing February night in Portland, Maine, 85 wealthy guests stood beneath chandeliers and campaign banners, waiting for Damon Caldwell to speak about family values, honest education, and safer communities. He was running for city council. His smile was polished, his suit was perfect, and his wife, my sister Serena, stood beside him like the portrait of success. They had 3 beautiful children, a house overlooking Casco Bay, and a story the whole city wanted to believe. But I knew the truth. I knew who woke those children at dawn. I knew who cleaned their fevers, packed their lunches, sang them to sleep, and disappeared into the basement before guests arrived. I knew who had been forced out of school at 15. I knew who had worked 13 to 16 hours a day for 8 years without a paycheck. And I knew whose name had been used to steal grant money, fake salaries, forge education records, destroy credit, and borrow $72,000 for a boat my father bragged about owning. So when Damon stepped toward the microphone to talk about integrity, I put down the tray. The silver rang softly against the glass table, but to me it sounded like a bell. I walked onto the stage before him. The room went quiet. Serena's face turned white. My mother, Patricia, lowered her champagne glass. My father, Ronald, stared at me with the same warning glare he had used my entire life. Damon froze with that practiced political smile still stuck on his face. I touched the microphone, and the small tap echoed through the speakers like a gunshot. Then I said, "Before Mr. Caldwell speaks about education, I'd like to make a toast to 8 years of stolen schooling, to $46,500 in wages I never received, to $91,200 in home education grants taken in my name, and to a $72,000 loan signed under my identity the moment I became old enough to be useful to them." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Damon stepped toward me, laughing nervously, telling the guests that I had been unstable for years, that his family had tried to help me. But before he could reach the microphone, blue and red lights swept across the tall glass doors behind him. The front gates opened. Unmarked vehicles and state police cruisers rolled up the snowy drive. That was the night their perfect story ended. But to understand how I got there, you have to go back 8 years, to the morning my mother took me out of school and called it love. And before we go back, take 1 second to hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Because if you have ever been told that family means silence, this story is for you. In 2016, I was 15 years old, a sophomore with straight A's and a secret folder full of college brochures I had no business dreaming about, according to my mother. I loved literature, history, and old newspapers. I wanted to study journalism. I wanted to write stories that made powerful people uncomfortable. Back then, I still believed my future belonged to me. Then my older sister Serena had her second child. She was married to Damon Caldwell, a charming local consultant with political ambitions and a talent for making selfishness sound like leadership. Serena wanted to be seen as a modern mother, a community figure, a woman who could have everything and still look effortless doing it. The only problem was that she did not want to raise her children. So one October morning, my mother walked into my room carrying a bag of baby clothes and placed it on top of my open textbook. I remember the smell of laundry detergent. I remember the tiny yellow socks spilling out of the bag. I remember her saying, "Serena needs you. Family comes before fantasies." I thought she meant I would babysit after school for a few weeks. Instead, the next morning she drove me to my high school, walked into the guidance office, and signed my withdrawal papers. She told the counselor I would be enrolled in a private home education program. My English teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, was there. She argued. She showed my test scores. She said I had a future. My mother smiled politely and said, "A girl who understands family already has a future." I stood there, 15 years old, too stunned to speak, while the door to my life closed behind me. There was no home education program, no tutor, no curriculum, no exams. My new classroom was Serena's kitchen, her laundry room, and the nursery where Ethan cried at sunrise and Noah needed his bottle warmed exactly right. At first, I still slept in my parents' house. Then Serena said the drive was inconvenient. Damon said it would be more efficient if I stayed with them full time. So they moved me into the basement of their waterfront home. They called it a room, but it was storage with a twin bed. One small window had been painted shut against the winter draft. There was no proper door, just a heavy curtain. I had a lamp, a pile of Serena's old clothes, and a plastic bin where I kept the few things that still belonged to me. My days started at 5 in the morning. I made breakfast, changed diapers, packed school bags, cleaned spills, folded laundry, carried Lily on my hip, timed Noah's inhaler when the cold air tightened his chest, and sat outside Ethan's room until he fell asleep because he was afraid of the dark. Serena left for meetings, lunches, charity committees, spa appointments, anything that made her look important. Damon left for networking breakfasts, donor meetings, and campaign strategy sessions long before he ever announced a campaign. They kissed the children for photographs and handed them back to me when the camera disappeared. The children called me May May. At first it made me smile, later it became the chain around my neck. Because I loved them. I loved Ethan's serious little face when he tried to protect his brother. I loved Noah's laugh when he forgot he was shy. I loved Lily's warm cheek against my shoulder when she fell asleep. My family knew I would not abandon them, and they used that love like a locked door. Every time I asked about school, Patricia said I was selfish. Every time I asked about money, Ronald said I was greedy. Every time I looked tired, Serena reminded me that they fed me, housed me, and tolerated me. Damon liked to say I was learning responsibility. Out there, he would say, pointing toward the windows like the world was a dangerous country I could never survive. People have to earn their keep. I did not know then that on paper, I was earning more than most people my age. I only knew that my shoes leaked. One winter my boots split across the sole. Snow soaked through my socks every morning when I walked Ethan to the bus stop. I asked my father for $65 to buy a discount pair from a clearance store. He set down his wineglass, looked at me across Serena's polished dining table, and said, "You sleep under someone else's roof, eat food someone else pays for, use heat someone else provides, and you still have the nerve to ask for cash?" My mother told me to wear thicker socks. Serena sighed like my poverty was embarrassing. Damon did not even look up from his phone. That night, I sat on the basement floor holding my wet socks near the heater, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was nothing without them. That is what abuse does when it is dressed as family. It does not only take your freedom, it teaches you to call the cage shelter. 8 years passed that way. Then, in January of 2024, while sorting laundry in Serena's heated laundry room, I went to get the mail. There were campaign flyers with Damon's face on them, invitations, bills, glossy catalogs Serena would leave open around the house. Near the bottom was an envelope addressed to me, Maya Whitaker. I almost did not recognize the sight of my own name. I rarely received mail. I had no bank account, no credit card, no job, no school, no life outside that house. The envelope came from the main office of financial oversight. I opened it at the kitchen island, my hands still smelling like detergent. The letter said my file had been flagged for review due to irregularities involving academic status, employment records, child care disbursements, education grants, and tax reporting connected to my Social Security number. It said failure to cooperate could result in state and federal charges. I read it 3 times. Academic status, employment records, child care disbursements. I had not been a student since I was 15. I had never been formally employed in my life. I had never filled out a tax form, signed a contract, or received a paycheck. Yet the state believed money had been moving under my name. Standing there in Serena's beautiful kitchen, with the marble counters shining and family portraits smiling from the walls, I felt the house change around me. It was no longer just a prison. It was a crime scene. A few days later, while cleaning Damon's home office, I found the first piece of proof. His office was usually locked, but that morning he left in a rush and forgot. I was emptying the trash beside the shredder when I saw a paper caught behind the bin. I pulled it out and smoothed the wrinkles against the desk. It was a W-2 form. Employee name: Maya Whitaker. Employer: Harbor Light Child Development Initiative. Annual wages: $46,500. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. $46,500. I had begged for $65 and been humiliated. I had worn cracked boots through Maine winters. I had slept behind a curtain in a basement. But according to federal tax records, I was a full-time employee earning a real salary. I folded the paper, hid it inside my sweater, and carried it down to the basement like it might burn through the fabric. That night, after everyone was asleep, I used Ethan's old laptop, the one with a cracked screen and a battery that died unless it was plugged in, and searched Harbor Light Child Development Initiative. The first result was a local newspaper article. In the photo, Serena stood on a stage in a white blazer, holding a glass award. The headline called her Community Mother of the Year. The article praised her for founding a child development initiative that supported working families in Portland. It described her as a selfless mother, a visionary, a woman who understood the sacrifices required to nurture young minds. I read her quote 3 times. She said, "Every child deserves a safe, loving place to grow." I almost laughed, but nothing came out. Harbor Light was not a child care center. It was not a charity. It was a shell built on my unpaid labor. The children she claimed to serve were her own. The loving place she described was the house where I raised them while she accepted awards. Serena had stolen my work and turned it into a trophy, but that was only the first layer. A week later, she dropped a bank statement in her dressing room. I picked it up because I was trained to pick up everything they left behind. One line caught my eye. Maine Home Education Support Grant, $950, deposited monthly into my mother's account. I sat on the floor with the paper in my lap, doing the math. $950 a month. 12 months a year. 8 years. More than $91,000. Patricia had taken me out of school, promised the state she would educate me at home, then collected money every month while I cleaned Serena's house. But if the grant kept coming, they must have submitted proof of my academic progress, test scores, reports, evaluations. Someone had been pretending I was still learning. Someone had been pretending to be me. That thought scared me more than the money. Money could be stolen from a distance, but handwriting, school records, test answers that felt intimate, like someone had climbed inside my skin. I called the number on the state letter from the prepaid phone I had hidden under my mattress for emergencies. I had bought it years earlier with spare change from grocery trips. The woman who answered was Nora Bellamy, a state financial auditor. Her voice was calm, precise, and cold, in the way serious people sound when they already know more than they are saying. She asked to meet me at a diner near the old harbor, far from Serena's neighborhood. I paid a teenage neighbor $40 to watch the kids at an indoor play space for 2 hours and drove Serena's spare car with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Nora was waiting in a corner booth with a leather briefcase beside her. She did not hug me. She did not pity me. She opened the briefcase and laid out my stolen life in documents. Patricia had filed sworn home education affidavits every year. Damon had registered Harbor Light as a nonprofit child development initiative and claimed me as a salaried employee. Serena had signed forms as executive director. The fake salary allowed them to claim subsidies, reduce taxes, and funnel money into Damon's growing political operation. Then Nora pushed a folder toward me. Inside were standardized tests submitted under my name. I turned the first page and saw the handwriting. Not my mother's, not my father's, Serena's. I knew that sharp slant, those perfect loops, those clean little margins. I had seen them on grocery lists, legal notes, and thank you cards. My sister had spent years taking exams as me, proving to the state that I was thriving academically while I was downstairs folding her towels. She did not just steal my labor, she stole the record of my mind. On the drive back, I felt hollow. But there was still more. That night, using the W-2 and my social security number, I checked my credit for the first time in my life. The verification questions were like ghosts from a childhood I barely remembered. Old addresses, vehicles my family had owned, banks I had never used. When the dashboard finally loaded, a red number appeared. 392. My credit score was 392. 4 credit cards had been opened under my name. They carried more than $31,000 in debt, late payments, penalties, interest. The billing addresses led back to my parents' house. Then I saw the largest account, a $72,000 personal loan secured by a small luxury boat, my father's boat, the one Ronald polished every summer, the one he told neighbors he had earned after a lifetime of hard work. I clicked the loan details. The origination date was my 18th birthday. I remembered that day. I had spent the morning cleaning Serena's guest bathroom, and the evening making cupcakes for Ethan's school fundraiser. Nobody bought me a cake. Nobody gave me a card. Nobody said I was an adult now. But my father had walked into a credit union and turned my adulthood into collateral. That betrayal did not feel hot like anger. It felt cold, clean, permanent. They had taken my past by pulling me from school. They had consumed my present by making me raise children for free. And they had trapped my future by destroying the credit I would need to rent an apartment, buy a car, or return to school. Around that time, Serena and Patricia suddenly became kind. One evening, they called me into the kitchen. Serena had made tea. Patricia had bought bakery cookies. They smiled too much. Serena slid a thick document across the island and said it was a simple household privacy agreement for Damon's campaign. Reporters were asking questions, she said. Everyone in the home needed to sign. I looked at the pages. The first heading said Confidentiality Agreement. The next said Financial Proxy Authorization, then Retroactive Consent, then Restriction on Disclosure to Government Agencies. My mouth went dry. The document would forbid me from speaking to investigators, give Serena the power to sign financial papers for me, and retroactively approve everything that had already been done in my name. If I signed, I would legalize their crimes. I would become the willing accomplice they needed. Serena placed a pen beside my hand. Patricia stood behind me, blocking the hallway. The room was warm, but I felt trapped in ice. If I refused, they would know I understood. If I signed, I would be buried, so I let my hand shake. I dropped the pen, pressed my fingers to my temples, and whispered that the lights were making me sick. I had suffered migraines as a teenager. They believed that, because it was useful to them. I told Serena the words were blurring, that I needed to lie down in the dark before I could read. She was irritated, but she let me go. Later, when the kitchen was empty, I crept back upstairs, took the document into the powder room, locked the door, and photographed every page with my prepaid phone. Then I returned it exactly where it had been. That night I heard Damon come home and ask if my signature had been secured. Serena said she would get it in the morning. That was when I knew I could not wait. I packed my birth certificate, the W-2, the bank statement, the credit report, and my phone into a plastic bag. I took a screwdriver and scraped the paint around the basement window until my knuckles bled. The window finally groaned open, and freezing air rushed in. I crawled through and fell into the snow outside. I walked for miles through the dark, my broken shoes soaking through, the wind cutting my face, until I reached a bus shelter near the harbor. At dawn, I called Mrs. Evelyn Hart, the teacher who had once fought for me. She answered on the second ring. I said, "This is Maya Whitaker." There was a pause. Then she said, "Where are you?" Not why are you calling, not what happened, just where are you? She came in an old sedan, bought me breakfast I could barely eat, and listened while I showed her everything. Her face did not soften with pity. It hardened with rage. She drove me straight to a nonprofit legal clinic downtown. A lawyer named Caleb Price reviewed the documents. He looked exhausted in the way good lawyers look when they have seen too much cruelty disguised as paperwork. He told me the crimes were serious: tax fraud, identity theft, public benefit fraud, education fraud, credit fraud, coercion, obstruction. He said if I gave the evidence to the state, Damon, Serena, Patricia, and Ronald could all face charges. The room went quiet. I thought of Ethan, Noah, and Lily. I thought of Lily's little hand wrapped around my finger, Noah's inhaler, Ethan asking me to leave the hall light on. I had protected them from nightmares, fevers, scraped knees, and lonely mornings. If I pulled this trigger, their home would explode. But if I stayed silent, I would be indicted with the people who stole from me. Later that day, Nora called. Her tone was sharper than before. Damon's political opponent had requested financial records related to Harbor Light. The press was circling. The state could no longer conduct a quiet review. Nora gave me 60 hours to submit a sworn affidavit. If I did not, the evidence on paper would classify me as an active participant. 60 hours. That was how long I had to decide whether I would burn with them or tell the truth. I went back to Serena's house because I needed them not to suspect I had escaped, and because I needed to see the children. The next morning, I reminded Serena I had a free clinic appointment for the back pain that had worsened from years of lifting children in laundry baskets. She did not even look up from her phone. She said she had a donor networking event for Harbor Light and I would need to cancel. I told her I had waited months. I told her the pain was getting worse. That was when her mask slipped. She stood so fast the stool scraped the floor. She called me selfish, ungrateful, uneducated. She said I had no money, no diploma, no employment history, no place to go. Then she leaned close and whispered, "You exist because I allow you to exist. Do not confuse my pity with your freedom." Something inside me went still. For years, guilt had kept me quiet. I thought exposing Serena and Damon would hurt the children. But in that moment, I realized the children were already living inside a lie. Protecting them did not mean protecting the predators raising them. It meant refusing to let abuse be the family tradition they inherited. That afternoon, Damon left his office computer unlocked. I was not looking for more tax evidence. I already had enough. I was looking for the future they planned for me. I found a folder called Post-Campaign Household Transition. Inside was a schedule. After the election, they would hire a professional nanny, enroll Lily full-time, and remove me from the house. The public story would be that Damon and Serena had generously funded my placement in an adult education and mental health recovery program. If I protested, they would call me unstable. They had planned to use me, discard me, and make my disappearance part of their charity brand. I closed the file, turned off the screen, and felt fear sharpen into purpose. That night, I called Nora and said, "I'll sign." The next morning at the legal clinic, Caleb placed a 34-page affidavit in front of me. It documented the day I was taken out of school, 8 years of unpaid labor, the fake W-2, Harbor Light, the stolen education grants, Serena's forged tests, my destroyed credit, the $72,000 loan, and the document they tried to force me to sign. I picked up the pen and signed my full legal name. For years, other people had used my name as a tool. That day, I used it as a weapon. Nora notarized the statement, then asked for Damon's fundraiser schedule. I told her guests arrived at 7, the keynote began at 8:20, and the security gates usually locked at 8. She looked at me and said, "Then leave them open." Saturday night arrived under heavy snow. Serena gave me a black server's shirt and stiff black pants. She told me not to introduce myself as her sister. If anyone asked, I was hired help. I was not to speak to reporters, not to look too long at donors, not to embarrass the family. I held the uniform and said, "I understand. Tonight I'll play exactly the role you gave me." She smiled, satisfied by what she thought was obedience. At 7, the guests arrived. Donors, developers, school officials, local reporters, women in fur coats, men with expensive watches, people who knew how to admire power without asking where it came from. I took coats. I carried drinks. I passed champagne to people funding a campaign built on my stolen life. Patricia stood near the fireplace bragging about Ronald's boat. Ronald soaked up congratulations like a king. Serena spoke to a reporter about the emotional labor of running a child development initiative. Damon shook hands beneath a banner that read, "Strong families, honest education, safer communities." At 8:12, I stepped into the dark hallway and texted Nora, "Gate is open." Her reply came back, "We are in position." I slipped the phone into my pocket, picked up an empty tray, and walked toward the stage. The host began introducing Damon. The room applauded. Before Damon could reach the microphone, I did. I set the tray down. The sound rang through the room. I stepped behind the podium and tapped the mic. Conversation stopped. 85 faces turned toward me. Serena started moving immediately, pushing through the crowd, eyes wide with panic. Damon's smile faltered. I said, "My name is Maya Whitaker. I am not hired help. I am Serena Caldwell's sister. I am the woman who raised her 3 children for 8 years, while this family told the world they stood for education and family values." A murmur passed through the room. I continued before anyone could stop me. I told them I was pulled out of school at 15. I told them I worked 13 to 16 hours a day with no wages, no contract, no diploma, and no way out. I told them Damon's nonprofit had listed me as an employee earning $46,500 a year, though I had never received a single paycheck. I asked the room if any of them had ever been paid for 8 years without seeing one check. Nobody laughed. A reporter raised his recorder. I pointed toward Serena and said Harbor Light Child Development Initiative was not the charity she claimed it was. It was a shell used to collect subsidies and polish her reputation while I did the work she accepted awards for. Serena reached the bottom of the stage and hissed my name, promising I would regret this. I looked down at her and said into the microphone, "I am just getting to the educational part." Then I told them Patricia had collected $950 a month in home education grants, while I never received a single lesson. I told them Serena had taken standardized tests under my name to keep the money flowing. Serena stepped back like I had struck her. The reporter started taking photos. Patricia began crying near the fireplace. Ronald's face turned red. Then I told them about my credit score. 392, 4 credit cards, $31,000 in debt, a $72,000 boat loan signed under my identity on my 18th birthday. I looked at my father and said, "The day I became a legal adult, my father did not give me a cake. He gave me a debt." The room erupted. Damon rushed onto the stage with his hands raised, laughing softly as if comforting a crowd after an accident. He apologized to the guests and said I had struggled with mental health issues for years. He said his family had tried to provide me with stability. He called my words a tragic episode. Then he leaned close enough that only I could hear him and whispered, "Let go of the microphone before I destroy you." I did not let go. I looked through the glass doors behind him. The first blue and red lights appeared at the edge of the driveway. Damon turned his head, and his face emptied. The front doors opened. Nora Bellamy walked in with investigators and Maine State Police. No sirens, no shouting. Just the clean, devastating silence of authority arriving with paperwork. Nora announced a search and seizure warrant connected to tax fraud, public benefit embezzlement, identity theft, credit fraud, education fraud, and obstruction of a state investigation. The donors backed away from Damon as if scandal were contagious. Reporters lifted cameras. Guests abandoned glasses on tables and rushed for coats. The perfect room became a crime scene. Damon moved first, because cowards always do when the ship sinks. He pointed at Serena and said she handled Harbor Light. He said he knew nothing. Serena stared at him, then screamed that he built the tax structure, used the money for his campaign, and told her what to sign. Patricia sobbed about reputation, not regret. Ronald came toward me, ordering me to take it back, ordering me to tell them I was confused. He shouted, "I signed those papers to keep a roof over your head. You should be grateful." An investigator turned slowly, raised a recorder, and asked, "Sir, are you confirming that you signed financial documents using a social security number that did not belong to you?" Ronald stopped. His mouth opened, then closed. His own arrogance had handed them the confession I never could have forced from him. I gave Nora the envelope I had hidden under a catering table, photos of the agreement, copies of the W-2, bank statements, credit reports, locations of Damon's hard drives. Then I walked inside. The house was full of investigators now, but the basement was quiet. I packed everything I owned into one canvas bag, A few old sweaters, my birth certificate, my phone, my credit report, and a small notebook Ethan had once drawn in. 8 years of my life fit in a bag I could carry with one hand. Before I left, I went upstairs to the playroom. Ethan, Noah, and Lily were sitting together, scared and confused. Lily reached for me first. I dropped the bag and held all three of them. Ethan asked, May, are you leaving? My heart broke in a way no courtroom could fix. I told them none of this was their fault. I told them adults had made terrible choices and I had to leave to protect myself. I told them I loved them more than they could understand. Noah clung to my leg. Lily cried into my shoulder. Ethan tried not to cry because he was the oldest. Leaving that room was the hardest thing I had ever done. But staying would have taught them that love means letting people destroy you. I walked out through the front door into the snow, past police lights, past the boat Ronald had stolen my future to buy, past the gates I had left open, and I did not look back. The fallout was fast. Damon withdrew from the race within 24 hours. His donors disappeared. His campaign became a headline. He later accepted a plea tied to tax fraud and public benefit embezzlement, losing the political future he had built on my silence. Serena lost her charity positions and was barred from operating any childcare organization receiving public funds. Her law-adjacent consulting career collapsed under the weight of publicity. Patricia and Ronald were ordered to repay the education grants, and the boat was seized. Their assets were frozen, their social circle vanished, and the people who had once praised their discipline crossed the street to avoid them. But my recovery was not dramatic. It was slow. It was paperwork, identity theft reports, credit disputes, bus rides, cheap meals, and learning how to sleep in a room where no one could summon me from upstairs. 9 months later, I sat in a community college testing center with a number 2 pencil in my hand, taking the GED exam under my own name. No Serena filling bubbles for me, no Patricia signing forms, no Damon claiming wages, no Ronald turning my signature into debt. Just me, my name, my answers, my future. When I turned in the final section and stepped outside into the cold Portland air, freedom did not feel like fireworks. It felt like a key to a rented room, a paycheck from my job at a small bookstore, a bank account with my name on it, a pair of winter boots I bought myself that did not leak. A few weeks after I passed, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a drawing from Ethan. He had drawn me standing by the sea, holding a blue book, with a huge yellow sun above my head. Underneath, in uneven letters, he had written, I miss you, May. I cried when I saw it, but not the way I used to cry in the basement. These tears did not come from despair. They came from love, grief, and the strange peace of knowing that leaving was not abandonment. Sometimes leaving is the first honest thing a person can do. I pinned the drawing to my wall beside my GED notice. Then I opened the admissions catalog from a state university and began reading. I was 23 years old. I had lost 8 years. But for the first time in my life, the road ahead did not belong to Patricia, Ronald, Serena, or Damon. It belonged to me. And if there is one thing I want you to remember, it is this. They took my school, my labor, my credit, my name, and almost my future. But they made one mistake. They left me alive long enough to remember who I was. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment for Maya. Subscribe for more stories of truth, survival, and justice. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is only quiet because they are collecting evidence.